If you grew up watching TV in the 1990s, there is one foreign language phrase you're sure to recognize.
Bonjour, je suis le grand Muzzy.
Je suis la jeune fille.
Yes, that's French they're speaking. And no, these children aren't French.
They're American, and they've acquired their amazing new language skills from Muzzy, the remarkable new video language program for children developed by the British Broadcasting Corporation.
Muzzy Foreign Language Courses promised parents it could teach their children French, Spanish, Italian, or German using an extremely bizarre and disturbing animated movie that came on 4 VHS tapes. 2 tapes of the movie in English, and then 2 tapes of the exact same movie in whatever foreign language you chose. I chose French, which I got off eBay for a very affordable price of $25, which is less than one of the 6 easy payments of $28.08 that this was originally sold for. That comes to a whopping $168.48. Adjusted for inflation, that's $330. That's insanely expensive. This thing was directed at and marketed to yuppie parents with money to burn. Me, I had to save up my money for a month so I could buy a Tamagotchi when they were cool. But I didn't have to save up my money to buy Muzzy. All I had to do was wait 30 years for the price to drop. So basically, according to the parents' instructional guide, all you gotta do is plop your kids in front of the TV, put the Muzzy video cassette in your VCR, place your child in front of the TV, start the video. Well, let's do it. Fair warning though, this movie has an extremely disturbing plot line that grapples with some of the deepest ethical questions of existential philosophy and consciousness. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Now, we are first introduced to Muzzy while he is floating around inside his interplanetary spaceship while he's munching on a bag of cocks. You heard that right. A bag of clocks. Cuckoo clocks, alarm clocks, grandfather clocks. He just gobbles them up. Can't help himself. And while traveling the galaxy, Muzzy happens upon a planet called Gondo Land. And this is how we're introduced to the rest of the characters that you see on the box set cover art. There's the king, who is described as strong.
I'm the king. I'm the king of Gondo Land.
There's the queen, who is described as fat, and she's actually very body positive about it. And side note, she's actually voiced by the person who played the herbology professor in Harry Potter. There's Princess Sylvia, who calls herself beautiful.
I'm beautiful.
Then there's Bob the gardener, who's described as brave, and he is in love with Princess Sylvia. And lucky for him, Princess Sylvia loves him back.
Oh, Sylvia. Sylvia.
And then there's Corvax, who's the sneaky right hand of the king. He's exactly like Wormtongue from Lord of the Rings. And he's also in love with Princess Sylvia. It's a love triangle that sets the stage of the movie. It's a classic tale, really. A forbidden love affair between a high-status young lady and a lowly peasant. Now, once all the characters have introduced themselves, the story begins in the royal garden. The king and queen are collecting fruit, and the queen is gorging herself on it because that's what morbidly obese people do, I guess. And Corvax is torturing Bob by making him count each and every single flower in the garden. Princess Sylvia packs some food and sneaks Bob away to go on a picnic with her. And Corvax oversees them speed off on Bob's motorbike, and he immediately rats them out to the king. The king and queen and Corvax chase after Bob and Sylvia in a small Robinson R-22 helicopter, which is actually the best-selling low-cost civilian helicopter on the market, but it's a 2-seater, and they're really pushing their weight limit by cramming 3 of themselves in there. Anyway, so they catch up to Bob the gardener and Sylvia on the motorbike, and they land, and somehow an entire platoon of soldiers exit the helicopter, which is completely impossible in a Robinson R-22, maybe a Chinook. And then the king orders Bob arrested despite the princess's protests. Bob the gardener is then taken to prison where Corvax tells the booking clerk to assign Bob to cell number 19, as if there's something particularly terrible or awful about cell number 19.
Number 19.
The guards escort Bob down the hallway and toss him through the door, and Bob comes face to face with the terrifying space monster Muzzy. Fade to black. So this is the exact point in the movie that we'll all recognize from the commercial, where Muzzy introduces himself to Bob the gardener, and then the little girl says something I've never understood. So the scene fades to black, and now we're taken back to see how Muzzy ended up in prison. So apparently he was flying around Gondo Land in a spaceship when he decided to land in a park and have a picnic. But he quickly eats all the cocks in his bag, and he goes into town to buy some more food. There's a produce guy that offers him peaches and plums, but since Muzzy doesn't eat any of this regular food, he starts looking around for something to eat, and he comes upon these parking meters, which I guess are kind of like clocks. I mean, they do have a timer, so I guess it works, and he just starts eating them. Well, the produce stand guy doesn't take kindly to Muzzy damaging public property, and he goes and he finds a police officer, and then the police officer gets a bunch of his buddies, and they come and they arrest Muzzy. And now the scene cuts back to inside the prison cell, where Corvax had just thrown Bob the gardener in with Muzzy, with every intention, mind you. Corvax was hoping that Muzzy would maul and dismember Bob, just the way that Han Solo was thrown in with Chewbacca. And just like in that movie, Muzzy and Bob become quick friends, and they hatch a plan to escape. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Corvax begins harassing and physically assaulting Sylvia, who locks herself in her bedroom, slamming the door on Corvax's long, hard nose, which is a not-so-subtle metaphor for his penis.
Oh, Sylvia, stop! Come here!
Defeated, Corvax heads back to his bedroom to rub one out on his computer, I think. Now, Corvax is a textbook incel who lives alone with his cat and spends most of his time on the internet. And so he's sitting there on his computer, and during the scene, we even see some binary code flash on his computer monitors, which I was really hoping would contain some sort of hidden message by the animators of the movie. So I took the code and I put it into a binary translator, but no, all I got was that Epstein didn't kill himself. So Corvax is like a turbo incel, right? And he decides to make digital images of Princess Sylvia on his computer to look at using Adobe Illustrator.
Yeah, that's good.
And then he actually prints one out and tapes it to the wall so that he can kiss it and touch it, and it's just extremely inappropriate for a kid's cartoon movie. But since the printout is on one of those old dot matrix style printers, it's not really getting Corvax's rocks off. So instead, he goes and he reprograms his computer to create a living physical clone of Sylvia that he can abuse at his leisure. It's sick. But here's the fatal flaw. He made the clone exactly like Princess Sylvia in every way, including her disgust for Corvax. So the first chance the clone gets, she runs out of Corvax's room. And Corvax is like, no! I mean, this is a theme throughout his life, I imagine. He's been rejected yet again. In a fit of frustration and sexual rage, he just smashes his computer with his fists, and somehow that causes the computer to malfunction, and it produces 5 more Sylvia clones. Things are getting insane. Now, each of these clones, each of these people are a distinct living person with her own hopes, dreams, and interests. They make that incredibly clear to the audience as the Sylvias gather together and discuss who they are, what it feels like to be alive, and what makes them different from one another.
I can walk. I can talk. I can hear. I can swim. I can run. This is fun. Who are we?
Now, this is important for later on at the end of the movie when the most disturbing thing to ever happen in a kid's cartoon movie takes place. So just keep that in mind. Meanwhile, Muzzy and Bob, having broken out of prison, have now sneaked their way into the royal garden where they see the real Princess Sylvia doing her exercises while singing happily. And for someone who believes their boyfriend, who she supposedly loves, is currently locked away in prison, being tortured or God knows what, she seems incredibly happy and totally unfazed by the whole thing. But then again, nor is Bob even mildly put off that Princess Sylvia seems to be keeping up with her normal happy routine. So anyways, Muzzy and Bob rush over to Sylvia, who hides them in the garden house and promises to bring them back some food because they're understandably very hungry. I think it's been at least like a full day since they've had anything to eat. Meanwhile, on the other side of the castle, the queen is sunbathing in full clothing when one of the Sylvia clones comes up to her and says she's going swimming. The king, meanwhile, is in another part of the yard chopping down a tree, which is like manual labor that's beneath the king, so I thought that was weird. But then I realized he just threw his only gardener into prison, and he probably just hasn't hired a replacement for that position yet. So anyways, he's chopping down a tree, and a different Sylvia clone comes up to him and tells him that she's going to go play tennis. Then the king walks up to the queen and is all like, hey, I just saw Sylvia. She's going to play tennis. And the queen is all like, what? No, she said she's going swimming. And at that exact moment, another Sylvia clone comes galloping out of the archway on horseback. And this, in script writing terminology, is what we call and things are only made worse by Corvax, who's trying to fix his mistake by deleting all the clones, but somehow he ends up only causing the computer to automatically generate an endless amount of clones non-stop. Hundreds of Princess Sylvia clones start popping out. And at no point is Corvax like, maybe I should just go unplug this thing or otherwise shut down power to the house. No, instead he just cowers in panic. So it's getting dark out now, and Bob and Muzzy are wondering where Sylvia is with the food. I assume it's taking so long because Sylvia not only has to pack a regular bag of food for Bob, but she also has to pack a sack of clocks. And there's only like at most 1 clock per room, so she has to go to every room in the palace, presumably, they don't show this, and get a bunch of clocks. That's the only way I can imagine she fills a whole sack with clocks. But anyway, she gets the bag of clocks and she takes the bag of food and she rushes down the stairs and out of the castle. And on the way, she encounters 2 of the Sylvia clones and it freaks her out. She rushes out to the garden shed and she tells Bob about the clones that she just saw, and Bob is all like comforting her and listening and like concerned about her feelings, and Muzzy is standing there like, where are the clocks? I'm hungry here.
Have you got any clocks?
Oh, Muzzy.
Bob the gardener then convinces Muzzy and Sylvia that they should sneak back over to the castle and investigate this clone situation. And as they're sneaking through the yard, they see hundreds of Sylvia clones around them. And they're not all the same anymore. Some of them are freakishly deformed, some of them are fat, some of them are tall, like 40, 50 feet tall. Now back inside the castle, the king and queen are panicking about what to do about all these clones. The king looks up the stairs and sees that the clones are coming down from this particular bedroom, so he follows the trail of Sylvia's up into Corvax's room, where he discovers the source of the problem. And he berates and he shouts at Corvax, and then he tries to stop the computer himself by ripping out a wad of wires, which obviously digitally transports the king inside the computer. And he's like pleading for Corvax to help. He's like, help me, Corvax, come help me. But Corvax, cowardly Corvax, decides to just cut his losses and run away, just like Wormtongue did. And he's like pushing past everyone on his way out the door. He pushes past the queen, he pushes past Bob, and at the bottom of the stairs, Bob decides he's gonna take off after Corvax and try to catch him. And Muzzy and Sylvia make their way upstairs to help the king and queen. Muzzy somehow quickly and expertly reprograms the computer to transfer the king back into the real world. And then meanwhile, in a scene right out of Die Hard, Bob catches up to Corvax just as he takes off in the helicopter and dangles off the landing gear. And everyone spots Bob through the window and they rush out onto the balcony to watch the action. And the helicopter is making like these series of wildly dangerous maneuvers. And Bob is like trying to wrestle the controls away from Corvax. He ends up popping him right in the face, knocking him out. And then Bob regains control of the helicopter, and using some sort of grappling hook and rope, he lowers Corvax's unconscious body down onto the balcony. And then somehow Bob instantaneously teleports himself into the doorway of the balcony with a whole squad of soldiers, and he's like, arrest that man. Bob is like ordering the soldiers to arrest Corvax. And it's like, I assume at this point in the story, Bob is still considered an escaped prisoner. It's not like the soldiers knew what was going on, but anyway, it doesn't matter. They listen to him for no reason and they arrest Corvax. Bob and Sylvia then embrace their hands in love. Bob turns towards the king for his approval, whose expression quickly eases into a warm smile, and they all have a good laugh. Bob and Sylvia then get married, while Muzzy, I guess, is the best man or something. Why not? So everything seemingly wrapped up in a nice tidy bow, right? Everything worked out and everyone's happy. But wait a minute, what about all those hundreds of Sylvia clones? Well, you know what? I guess they could spread themselves out over Gondo Land and they could all make a little nice life for themselves, right? No. Now get ready for the most disturbing part of this movie. The king, queen, Sylvia, and Bob all gather into the computer room and watch as Muzzy systematically executes each of the Sylvia clones one by one. And he has to like literally tell the clones, hey, stand in this one spot and don't move while you're disintegrated by the computer.
Stand there. Now.
And all the clones are forced to walk in backwards so they don't see what's about to happen to them. It's sick. Remember, each of these clones was a unique person with their own thoughts and feelings. They established that.
Who are you? Am I you? Are you me?
Why would they establish that these are individuals and then execute them all? And to have our protagonists do it, they're apparently completely thrilled with this outcome. I mean, this resolution forces the audience to grapple with some extremely difficult ethical questions. All right, so the movie closes with Muzzy boarding a spaceship and zipping into the galaxy, while the rest of the characters, including Corvax, wave goodbye. The whole movie has a runtime of 1 hour and 10 minutes, and it's worth noting that there's no practical reason why this had to be on 2 separate VHS tapes. It could have easily fit onto one, but obviously they were trying to package their product in a way that made it look like they had just so much material that it wouldn't fit on just one VHS tape. It's just a marketing technique used to sell their product, I get it. And this actually wasn't the BBC's first foray into foreign language education. In the late 1970s, the BBC produced a show called Follow Me, which taught English to foreigners and was mainly televised in China, during a time when that nation's entire educational system was in shambles due to the Cultural Revolution. An estimated 500 million people tuned in to Follow Me every week, and it was actually a really important cultural addition to Chinese society because it gave a lot of people who lived in terrible conditions at the time a glimpse into what life looked like in other parts of the world. 500 million people is a lot, and it was such a financial success for the BBC that they decided to hire the creator of that show and team him up with the famous animator Richard Taylor, and they came up with Muzzy, the title of which is a combination of the words fuzzy and monster. Did you even know that? Did you ever realize that? I didn't. Now, at first, the Muzzy Foreign Language Course wasn't marketed towards English-speaking yuppie parents with money to burn. It was originally meant to teach foreigners how to speak English. And if there's one thing everybody knows about first-generation immigrants, it's that they have loads of money to burn. False. Sales were terrible. They were extremely poor, so eventually this smart guy named Federico Malo approached the BBC and he said, hey, guys, instead of trying to sell this to people with no money, why don't you sell the distribution rights to me and I'll go over to America and find some folks with cash to burn and sell it to them. 22 million copies sold later, Federico Mallo is an extremely wealthy man. So wealthy that he went on to produce some of the greatest works in history, including Muzzy 2, Muzzy Comes Back, the 1989 sequel. Today, Muzzy has been revived in many ways. In 2014, the BBC released a remastered edition which had updated animations and largely kept the same basic story outline, minus a lot of the most disturbing stuff, of course. And you can even find Muzzy apps and games on your phone. As for me, well, I can finally say, Jesus la vie. Thanks everybody for watching. If you liked this video, thumbs up. If you hated it, thumbs down. And as always, please subscribe.